BLAQ BRILLIANCE, shining a memoir of motivational moments found within, as defining the purpose of one's humanity. Today, we introduce you to Assemblyman Khaleel Anderson.
My name is Khaleel Anderson, and I'm a member of the New York State Assembly serving the beautiful 31st Assembly District, and you're watching BLAQ Brilliance. My story, yes, it starts with me, but it ends with community. Geographically, I represent Hamels, Rockaway Beach, Edgemere, Arverne, Far Rockaway proper, Rosedale, Brookfield, Springfield Gardens, JFK Airport, South Richmond Hill, and South Ozone Park. But ultimately, I'm privileged to represent the people. My dad, who immigrated from Liberia to the United States just before the Second Civil War broke out in that nation, and my mom, yes, being of Bajan and Panamanian ancestry, grew up in the Black American experience. Much of her upbringing gave her that experience. And so it allows me to embody the best of two worlds, being of African descent, but also of Black American experience. So like bringing the two worlds together, and it certainly allowed me to be able to be in spaces where we are uplifting and bringing it together cultures and acknowledging cultures. My mom was a hard worker, trying to raise a household of 4 rambunctious young people, 3 boys and 1 girl, all with different ideas. But one thing that inspired me in her work and activism and community organizing that still rings hold in my personality and ability to organize today is just 1, hard work, but 2, having a big heart and caring. These are the things that inspire me about my mom, regardless if lupus tells me I cannot. I can do, regardless if arthritis tells me that I cannot, and she does. The things that she's been able to do in the community, being a volunteer at her local senior center, and putting together programs and resources for our neighbors, for sick, elderly, disabled, young people. She still tries to get out there and be out front. She still looks adversity in the face and says, I can do. Looking at adversity in the eye, saying that I can, and delivering for people who can't for themselves. When my family was forced to evacuate before Superstorm Sandy, we first lived in the gymnasium of Queensborough Community College, and then after a few days was moved to the campus of Queens College. Superstorm Sandy in general was a very traumatic experience for my family, for families across the Rockaway Peninsula that were impacted by the storm, for families across this district that were adversely impacted to the floodwaters and the wind and all of the disaster that came with Superstorm Sandy. And so myself and my family having to live at Queens College, I want to say the positive. We did get to be with each other more. I know when you live in a house or you live in an apartment, everybody wants to be in their own rooms and be separate, but it definitely forced us to be together more. But the food or lack thereof, and just lack of resources, even being in an evacuation center, really was traumatic for us. We didn't know where our next meal was coming from, whether it was going to be ready to eat, which is generally used for people who are at war. Soldiers and folks who are fighting use that not just for the sodium content, but also for energy. This is what we were eating as civilians. And so not knowing where that next meal came from, not knowing when we'll be able to go home, despair, pain and trauma that Superstorm Sandy brought upon our communities. I found myself still leaving the evacuation center and headed back to my home, the Rockaway Peninsula, to service the community. Whether it was doing food distribution, whether it was getting water to seniors who hadn't had water and God knows how long. Being out front so that we can address our crisis in our communities the way we know best. That's what building a self-sufficient community looks like in the face of disaster, in the face of fear, in the face of the unknown. We want to build a level of resiliency all across this district, all across the city, across this state, and across this nation, to where communities are self-sufficient and are able to serve the people that live in them when government can't step in, when the resources are not there. We have an emergency button that we can press that kicks in access to food. We know where the seniors live to get them the resources that they need. We know where the disabled live to get them the resources that we need or they need. We know where the people who are sick, who are lame, who don't have the resources that they need to get out. We know where they are, and we know how to best serve them. My parents, my mom, and my father, who raised me by God's grace to be humble, to understand that public service is the best type of service. Being able to connect people to resources, to services, to relationships, to help enhance and empower the critically important work that they're doing in our communities. Being the youngest Black person ever elected to state office, and I couldn't have picked a better place to live and to run here in Southeast Queens, where we're seeing Black leaders in all facets and all levels of government and all levels of leadership, not just making local news, but making national news for the critical work that they're doing to help service our communities, to help service families, and help to build bridges. Being 24 years old was certainly a flag for some folks, but for other folks who understood that my age did not match my experience and my commitment to the communities, the diverse communities of the 31st Assembly District. And so they were willing to go on a limb and trust in something new, trust in a new vision for our community, for our neighborhoods, because my experience was there forth. My experience in being a community organizer, an activist, a member of my local community board, a member of my local police precinct council, trying to bridge relationships between police and community. All of that work and all of that ability to work with leaders in our neighborhood prior to running for office really helped people understand that we've got to look at people on what for what they offer, what the experience they bring in the context of what the position actually does. And I think that being able to sell that message to constituents all across the district was key and critical to the historic election win that helps drive leadership and that helps drive change. Having the ability to trust in folks who are leading our community and our efforts forward in the political sphere. It's very multidimensional. I'm grateful for, and I'd also like to recognize my campaign co-chair, campaign manager, Tanagra Bledman, who was a critical leader in making sure that we ran a successful campaign, and is also a great political thought partner for not just myself, but many other candidates across the city that she's had the pleasure of working with. Our message, our motto was very clear. We said we wanted to build a new fight together, empowering a geographically and politically isolated community to work on one accord and to work together. And so that story starts with me, but if it ends with me, then we haven't told the full story. It has to end with community, and it has to end with building that true, real new fight together. And that's what our motto and our message of our campaign was. And we organized over 60 plus volunteers to get our message out, to safely, of course, during the height of the pandemic, knock doors, share literature, make phone calls, do all the key things in getting a message out and working to run on a message that builds community. Some of the people that I admire and some of the people who inspire me, Reverend Gray from Macedonia Baptist Church, who preaches the good words, also involved in the political scapes. I want to also acknowledge our former council member, now borough president, Donovan Richards, who even before me being in the political sphere, so to speak, saw my leadership, saw my abilities to perform and to deliver for the community, and wanted to uplift and empower. So I'm definitely grateful for our relationship and the work that we've been able to do. We want to also, of course, acknowledge our Congressman Meeks, who has always been a presence in the community, and we're so thankful for leadership that breaks the barriers that have been set in place by the systems that exist. No one wants to hear anything about politics when they can't feed their families. In the height of the pandemic, people didn't have access to food. People did not have access to opportunities to get to work and kind of live lives that they were living previous to the height of the pandemic. And so we had to make sure that our message was inclusive, and that message centered the struggle that they were facing in that moment. And so we were able to conquer some of those barriers and conquer some of those issues that stood in the way from a successful campaign. And I definitely want to thank my team and people who influenced and supported throughout. My dad left the home when I was 9, and although we hadn't had a direct in-person relationship through my years of growth as a preteen and a teenager, certainly phone calls and occasional visits have been critically helpful in the process of understanding and forgiveness. And for myself, just growing up as a young man in a single parent household definitely takes a toll, and definitely adds to my story of struggling to get where I am, blessed to serve today. Forgiveness is key, making sure that we highlight the positives in an individual and in a situation, and evaluate the negatives. Evaluate them. Don't forget them, don't hide them. Evaluate them, juxtaposed to the things that are positive. And I think that's been key to helping me, one, build a strong relationship with my father, but also try to work through, some of the kinks of just someone not being around, but also being around in the ways that were appropriate for that moment. Healing for me and over a period of time looks like understanding, looks like forgiveness, but also looks like channeling that energy into something positive. When I was a young person, 7, 8 years old, trying to find myself, trying to figure out the areas that I cared the most about, but most importantly, trying to find a voice, I struggled. I got into fights. I got into a ton of trouble, in and out of the principal's office for poor behavior and struggling with anger issues, just growing up again in a single parent household, not knowing how to properly channel my anger and frustration. I want to say that community service and activism is how I broke out of being that angry young person, being that young person who struggled with behavior problems, being that young person that quite frankly struggled with my emotions and how to channel them, being now a community organizer, an activist, now an elected official. Those are the ways that I've been able to channel that energy. Whereas I'm not angry at my teacher or my principal for not giving us recess. I'm angry at a system that's allowed those deficiencies and inequities to perpetuate our daily lives. That's what I'm more angry about now. So I took that raw anger and frustration with mentors, with leaders, with people who supported me, like definitely a paraprofessional that comes to mind that was critical in my development and growth process and my transition was Mr. Keith Glenn from the Edgemere section of my community, was key in not just mentoring me, but being that father figure presence that I needed in my life, but also helping me find my voice. And my voice was always in speaking up for others. My voice was always in community activism. My voice was always in speaking for the unheard. And I just couldn't find that voice in the midst of trying to struggle and work through my emotions and how I felt. And as a young person, I know I'm being super vulnerable with our friends here at BLAQ Brilliance. I'd like to thank our gracious hosts of BLAQ Brilliance, Raleigh Hall, for providing a platform for Black leaders, for Black community to be uplifted and to be highlighted. We're so thankful for his leadership in building this platform, and we're urging you and encouraging you to join us Sundays at 5 p.m. And I look forward to you guys tuning in to BLAQ Brilliance.
We cry freedom, freedom. With one voice we sing. We cry freedom, freedom. The freedom of our King. We sing God's revolution out of the depths of our soul. We sing freedom, the freedom of our King. We cry freedom, freedom. With one voice we sing. We cry freedom.